What happens when a man who has everything is forced to confront everything he's throwing away, all in the merciless glare of public opinion? We're not talking about a movie scene. We're talking about Rafferty Maxwell, the real estate titan, standing in the exclusive private terminal of JFK, doting on his much younger girlfriend, Kensington Lowe. He carried her designer pink handbag, a symbol of his devotion. But what he didn't know was that his wife Garnet was about to arrive, and she wasn't coming alone. She was bringing with her a secret he never knew existed, their 4 newborn children. This isn't just a story of infidelity, it's a story of a breathtaking collision between a private fantasy and a devastating reality, a battle for an empire, and the quiet, unshakable power of a woman pushed too far. The air in the Ark. JFK's ultra-exclusive private terminal was different. It was a sterile, expensive mixture of jet fuel, French perfume, and the silent hum of immense wealth. Here the chaos of public travel was a distant, vulgar rumor. Men in bespoke suits spoke in hushed tones into their phones, moving billions of dollars between continents, while women, with surgically perfected faces, scrolled through their iPads, their diamonds catching the recessed lighting with cold fire. At the center of this opulent tranquility was Rafferty Maxwell. At 48, he was a specimen of preserved power. His hair was a distinguished silver at the temples, a stark contrast to the deep predatory black. His face, weathered by years of ruthless negotiations and transatlantic flights, was still undeniably handsome. He wore a navy, Loro Piana cashmere sweater that probably cost more than the average person's monthly rent tailored trousers, and on his wrist a Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch that didn't just tell time, it declared his station in the world. Rafferty Maxwell didn't just own buildings, he owned skylines. His company, Maxwell Global Properties, had reshaped the landscapes of New York, London, and Dubai. Beside him, practically draped over his arm, was Kensington Lowe. At 26, she was the polar opposite of the terminal's hushed elegance. She was loud, vibrant, and incandescently beautiful in a way that demanded attention. Her blonde hair was impossibly long and artfully tousled. Her lips were plumped to a perfect pout, and her dress was a sliver of neon silk that left little to the imagination. She was an Instagram influencer, turned brand consultant, a modern career path that seemed to primarily involve being seen in the right places with the right people. And Rafferty Maxwell was the rightest of people. "Raffy darling," she cooed, her voice a practiced, breathy purr. "Did you remember to tell the pilot no turbulence? My nerves can't handle it before a champagne brunch." Rafferty smiled, a practiced, indulgent smile he reserved for her. "Everything is taken care of, my dear. The Gulfstream G700 is the smoothest ride in the sky. Captain DeLuca knows the drill." The most telling detail of the entire scene, the one that made even the jaded staff raise a subtle eyebrow, was the handbag. It was a garish, bubblegum pink Hermes Kelly bag. And it wasn't on Kensington's arm. It was slung awkwardly over Rafferty Maxwell's broad shoulder. He, a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, was carrying her purse like a well-trained accessory. He held it while she took a selfie, angling her phone to capture the Maxwell private jet through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind them. "The light in here is tragic," she complained, deleting the photo. "I need that St. Bart's glow. Remind me to call my facialist the second we land." "Of course," Rafferty said. He was an expert at navigating these conversations. With Kensington, he wasn't a CEO, he was a concierge. It was a role he found strangely relaxing. She demanded nothing of his intellect, only his wallet. After years of a marriage that had become more of a corporate merger than a romance, Kensington's simple transactional nature was a relief. His wife Garnet was a different species altogether. They had been married for 12 years. It was a suitable match, a union of old money and new power. Garnet was quiet, elegant, and possessed a grace that made Kensington's manufactured glamour look cheap. But she was distant. In the last few years, a chasm had opened between them. Their conversations were about charity galas, portfolio updates, and the management of their sprawling Connecticut estate. The passion had long since evaporated, leaving behind a polite, sterile partnership. He told himself it was amicable. He told himself she was probably happier this way, free to pursue her philanthropic interests while he pursued his business. Kensington was his business now, a very expensive, high-maintenance subsidiary. "Is the villa staff ready? I sent them a list of my requirements," Kensington said, pulling his attention back. "Organic Ake Fiji water only. Not Evian, it's far too mineralic, and the thread count on the sheets needs to be at least 1,200. "All handled," Rafferty assured her. "I had my assistant triple-check with the concierge. Your comfort is my top priority." He leaned in and kissed her a public display that was both a performance for her and a middle finger to the world. He came from the world of discreet affairs and quiet arrangements. He was Rafferty Maxwell. The rules didn't apply to him. A discreet attendant approached them. "Mr. Maxwell, Ms. Lowe, the aircraft is ready for boarding whenever you are." "Finally," Kensington sighed, standing up and stretching like a cat. "Let's go. I need a mimosa." Rafferty stood, adjusted the ridiculous pink bag on his shoulder, and offered her his arm. They began to walk towards the glass doors leading to the tarmac, a perfect picture of modern indulgence. He felt a surge of freedom. This trip to St. Bart's was the final step. He had already instructed his lawyer, the notoriously ruthless shark Robert Driscoll, to draw up the divorce papers. He would serve them to Garnet when he returned. He would be generous, of course. He wasn't a monster. He would give her the Connecticut estate, a sizable settlement, and her freedom. It was what she wanted, he reasoned. She would be fine. They were 10 feet from the door when another private terminal attendant, a young woman with a panicked look in her eyes, scurried toward them. "Mr. Maxwell, sir," she stammered, wringing her hands. There's someone here to see you." Rafferty frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone. We're about to depart." Kensington let out an annoyed huff. "Tell them he's busy. Can't people understand what a private terminal is for—" "She was very insistent, sir," the attendant whispered, her eyes wide. It's Mrs. Maxwell." The name hung in the air instantly, sucking the warmth from the room. Rafferty felt a cold stone drop in his stomach. Garnet. Here. It was impossible. She never came to the city anymore, let alone the airport. She hated flying. Kensington's grip on his arm tightened, her nails digging into his cashmere sweater. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, her voice losing its breathy affectation and gaining a sharp, venomous edge. "Did you tell her about us?" "No, of course not." Rafferty snapped, his mind racing. Was this an ambush? Had she found out how he was so careful? He pulled the pink bag off his shoulder, as if it had suddenly caught fire, setting it down on a nearby chair. His posture shifted. The indulgent concierge was gone, replaced instantly by the defensive, calculating CEO. "Where is she?" he demanded. The attendant simply pointed toward the main entrance of the private lounge. And then the automatic glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a scene so surreal, so utterly world-altering, that for a moment Rafferty Maxwell thought he was hallucinating. It was Garnet, but she wasn't alone. Garnet Maxwell stood in the entranceway, a portrait of calm in the eye of a hurricane she was about to create. She was 39, but today she looked ageless, possessed of an ethereal strength that seemed to bend the very light in the room. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored, cream-colored trench coat, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, her clear grey eyes, were fixed on Rafferty with an intensity that pinned him to the spot. But it wasn't just Garnet that commanded the room's absolute stunned attention. Flanking her were two uniformed nannies, each pushing a state-of-the-art double-wide stroller, and in those strollers, swaddled in soft white blankets, were four tiny, identical sleeping infants. Quadruplets. A collective, silent gasp seemed to ripple through the lounge. The billionaire, talking on his phone, slowly lowered it. The woman, with the diamonds, froze mid-scroll. Every eye was locked on the tableau at the entrance. The silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle, almost imperceptible squeak of a stroller wheel. Rafferty stared his brain, struggling to process the information his eyes were feeding him. 4 babies. His babies. When? How Garnet hadn't been... They hadn't. He tried to remember the last time they'd shared a bed. It had been nearly a year ago. A strained, obligatory night after their anniversary dinner. He'd been drunk on expensive wine and self-pity. He felt the blood drain from his face. The timeline. It was possible. But she had never said a word. Not one word. He had spoken to her on the phone just last week, a sterile 5-minute conversation about a leaking roof at the estate. She had sounded normal, distant, but normal. Kensington was the first to break the spell. She let out a short, sharp laugh of pure disbelief. "What is this, a joke? Are those rented?" Garnet's gaze flickered to Kensington, for a fraction of a second, a look of such profound dismissal that it was more insulting than any slur. Then her eyes returned to her husband. She took a step forward, her movements deliberate and graceful. The nannies followed, pushing the strollers onto the plush carpet. "Hello, Rafferty," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried across the cavernous room, cutting through the stunned silence like a shard of ice. Rafferty finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. "Garnet, what? What is this? Who are these?" "They are your children," she stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple, undeniable fact. "Our children," she gestured to the stroller on her right. "This is William and Oliver." Then to the one on her left. "And this is Charlotte and Sophia?" The names. They were so classic, so... Maxwell. He felt a wave of nausea. He took a hesitant step closer, peering into the strollers. 4 perfect miniature faces, all with the same wisp of dark hair. One of them, William, perhaps stirred in his sleep, his tiny mouth making a soft, sucking motion. The sight was so intimate, so real, it shattered the last of his denial. These were his children. He had a daughter, 2 daughters, and 2 sons. He was a father of 4. He looked up from the babies to his wife, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, guilt, and a terrifying, burgeoning sense of being trapped. "Why didn't you tell me?" "A year, Jen. You kept this from me for almost a year." "I was going to," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "I was waiting for the right time. But then I heard from a friend at the yacht club that you were taking your consultant," she said the word with a surgeon's precision, "to St. Bart's for an extended holiday. And I realized there would never be a right time. There is only now." Kensington, recovering from her initial shock, stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Rafferty, a territorial claim. "This is insane. You can't just show up here with baggage and expect to ruin our plans. Raffy and I are in love." Garnet finally gave Kensington her full attention. She looked her up and down, her gaze lingering for a moment on the neon dress and then on the discarded pink handbag on the chair. A flicker of something pity, perhaps, or contempt crossed her face before it was replaced by a look of serene indifference. "I am not here to speak with you," Garnet said, her tone making it clear that Kensington was as significant as a piece of furniture. She turned back to Rafferty. "I believe you have a flight to catch, but I thought it was only fair that you meet your heirs before you left." Heirs. The word struck Rafferty with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just about babies. It was about legacy succession, the continuation of the Maxwell name. An empire he had built, now with 4 tiny, unexpected successes. Jen, listen. He began, trying to regain control to manage the situation as he would a hostile takeover. We need to talk about this. Privately, not here. There's nothing to talk about privately that hasn't already been made excruciatingly public, Garnet said, gesturing subtly to the entire lounge of onlookers who were now shamelessly staring, their phones discreetly angled to capture the drama. He could almost hear the frantic typing of texts, the gleeful gossip already spreading like wildfire through the upper echelons of New York society. Page 6 would have this by noon. I didn't come here to ask you to stay, Rafferty. She continued, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. I came here to deliver a message. From the pocket of her trench coat, she pulled out a thick folded document. She didn't hand it to him. Instead, she placed it gently on the edge of William and Oliver's stroller, right next to a spare pacifier. Those are divorce papers, she said, her voice clear and steady. My lawyer, Eleanor Reese, filed them this morning with the state of New York. And this, she patted the document, is a petition for sole legal and physical custody of our 4 children. Rafferty felt the floor drop out from under him. Divorce, custody, sole custody. She wasn't here to fight for him. She was here to erase him. Kensington scoffed, a desperate, ugly sound. You think you can take him for everything? He'll fight you. We'll fight you. Garnet ignored her completely. Her eyes filled with the sorrow so profound, it looked like strength remained locked on Rafferty. You wanted a life free of obligation, Rafferty. A life of champagne brunches and turbulence-free flights with your consultant. She looked at the pink bag. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose to carry her bag. Well, I have been carrying your children, and now I will carry on without you. One of the babies, Charlotte began to fuss, her tiny cry, cutting through the tense silence. One of the nannies immediately moved to soothe her. The sound seemed to break the spell that held Rafferty paralyzed. Garnet, wait, he pleaded, the desperation raw in his voice. You can't do this. They're my children too. Yes, they are, she said softly, a universe of pain in those 3 words. And they deserve a father who is present. A father who puts them first, not a man who puts them on a list of priorities somewhere below his mistress's comfort. She took one last look at him, at his shocked face, at the beautiful young woman beside him, at the life he had chosen. Enjoy St. Bart's, Rafferty. With that, she turned. As gracefully and deliberately as she had arrived, she and her small entourage, 2 nannies, 4 babies, a world of newfound power, headed for the exit. Rafferty stood frozen, the silent screams of a dozen emotions warring inside him. The woman he had dismissed as a quiet, passionless partner had just detonated a bomb in the center of his universe, and she had done it with the quiet dignity of a queen. Kensington grabbed his arm. Raffy, what are you doing? Let her go. We have a plane to catch. This is just a pathetic ploy for money. But Rafferty wasn't listening. He was watching the strollers disappear through the cutshaw of the glass doors. His children. His 4 children. He had just met them, and he was already losing them. He looked from the closing doors to the pink handbag still sitting on the chair, a symbol of his shallow, fleeting fantasy. And then he looked at the divorce papers, resting on the empty stroller she had left behind, a symbol of the devastating, permanent reality. The attendant who had announced Garnet's arrival approached him tentatively, holding out the abandoned document. Mr. Maxwell, your wife, she left this for you. Rafferty took the papers. The weight of them in his hands was heavier than any building he had ever constructed. The Gulfstream G700 sat gleaming on the tarmac, its engines humming a soft, powerful invitation to escape. But for Rafferty, Maxwell, it was no longer a symbol of freedom. It was a count waiting to fly him toward a meaningless paradise while his entire world imploded behind him. Are you even listening to me? Kensington's voice was shrill, the carefully constructed facade of the breezy influencer cracking to reveal the raw panic beneath. She's a lunatic, showing up like that, It's emotional terrorism. You have to call your lawyer, Raffi. We need to crush her. Rafferty barely heard her. His mind was a slideshow of horrors. Garnet's cold eyes, the four tiny faces in the strollers, the crisp, heavy feel of the legal documents in his hand. Petition for sole custody. The words echoed in his head, a death knell for a fatherhood he hadn't even known he possessed. I can't go, he mumbled, his voice hoarse. What? Kensington shrieked, her face contorting in disbelief. What do you mean you can't go? Our reservations, the Valor, the yacht I chartered for my birthday post. It's all paid for. He finally looked at her, and for the first time he saw her not as a beautiful escape, but as the architect of his current ruin. Her concerns the yacht. The Instagram post seemed so grotesquely trivial, so insultingly shallow, in the face of the cataclysm that had just occurred. The pink handbag on the chair seemed to mock him. My wife. He said the words, feeling foreign and potent on his tongue. Just served me with divorce papers. She also introduced me to my 4 children. I am not getting on a plane to St. Bart's. His tone was flat final. The indulgent Raffi was gone. In his place stood Rafferty Maxwell, the ruthless tycoon, but this time the target of his cold fury was his own life. Panic gave way to rage in Kensington's eyes. So that's it. She snaps her fingers, and you come running back like a pathetic little puppy after everything you told me about her, that she was cold, that your marriage was dead, you were supposed to leave her. It appears, Rafferty said, with a dark, humorless chuckle, that she has left me first. He strode over to the attendant's desk, the divorce papers clutched in his fist. Get Robert Driscoll on the phone for me, now. He barked the order with his old authority, the power he was used to wielding. The young attendant fumbled with the phone, startled by his intensity. Kensington followed him, her voice dropping to a desperate, manipulative whisper. Raffi, don't let her win. This is what she wants. She's trying to manipulate you with these babies. How do you even know they're yours? Did you get a test? The question was a vile, desperate gambit, and it landed with sickening precision. A flicker of doubt, a poison seed. But then the image of the 4 tiny faces flashed in his mind. The Maxwell chin, the dark wisps of hair. He knew. In the deepest, most terrified part of his soul, he knew. Don't, he said, his voice a low warning. He turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. Do not speak about my children, or my wife, ever again. The shift was palpable. The we she had so confidently used just minutes ago had vanished. It was now my children, my wife, and she was on the outside looking in at the wreckage of a family she had helped to destroy, but a family nonetheless. So what about me? She demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and fear. What about us? There is no us, Rafferty said, the words tasting like ash. There is a $5 billion empire, a public image that is currently being shredded and broadcast to every gossip columnist in the Western Hemisphere, and 4 infants who bear my name. That is what exists now. You were a distraction. The distraction is over. The cruelty of his words was absolute, a surgical strike designed to sever the connection completely. He was a man cornered, and like any cornered animal, he was lashing out at the most immediate threat to his survival. Right now, Kensington and everything she represented was a liability he could not afford. Her face crumpled. The tears were real this time, hot and ugly. You bastard, she sobbed. You used me. You told me you loved me. Mr. Maxwell, Mr. Driscoll is on line 1, the attendant interrupted, holding the phone out to him as if it were a bomb. Rafferty took the phone, turning his back on Kensington's tears. Robert, he said, his voice tight with controlled chaos, we have a situation. A Category 5 hurricane has just made landfall in my personal life. Yes, at JFK. No, you're not going to believe it. As he spoke, his voice dropping to a low, urgent murmur, Kensington stood watching him, tears streaming down her face. The dream was dissolving before her very eyes. The life of private jets, limitless credit cards, and eventually the coveted title of Mrs. Maxwell. It was all evaporating. She looked at her pink bag, once a trophy, now a pathetic monument to her folly. With a choked sob, she snatched the bag from the chair, grabbed her carry-on, and without another word, turned and fled. She didn't head for the private jet. She ran back toward the main terminal, back toward the world of commercial flights and public scrutiny, back to the anonymity she had so desperately tried to escape. Rafferty finished his call and hung up. The lounge was quiet now, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Kensington was gone. The plane was waiting. The divorce papers were in his hand. He was utterly, completely alone. He looked out the window at the G700. He thought of the Mimosa Kensington had wanted the turbulence-free flight. Then he thought of Garnet calmly navigating the chaos of an airport with 4 newborns. The sheer strength, the logistical brilliance, the steel-willed determination it must have taken. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated her so profoundly that it bordered on stupidity. He had seen her quietness as weakness, her grace as passivity. He had been a fool. The pilot's voice came over a small intercom on the desk. "Mr. Maxwell, are we still on schedule for departure to St. Barthélemy?" Rafferty picked up the intercom receiver. He looked at the legal papers in his hand, the words "sole custody" burning into his retinas. "No, Captain," he said, his voice raspy with defeat. "Change of plans. File a new flight plan. We're going to Connecticut." The story broke less than 3 hours after Garnet's quiet departure from the Ark. It wasn't just a ripple. It was a tsunami. The first alert came from page 6 with a headline that was as brutal as it was brilliant: Maxwell's quadruple bypass. Billionaire dumps influencer at airport after wife arrives with 4 secret babies. The article was a masterpiece of salacious detail, citing stunned sources inside the exclusive terminal. It painted a vivid picture: Rafferty Maxwell, the master of the universe, carrying a bubblegum pink Hermes handbag, cooing over his Instagram model girlfriend, Kensington Lowe. Then the cinematic entrance of the Ice Queen wife, Garnet Maxwell, with a veritable army of nannies and strollers. The piece ended with the detail of the divorce papers being served on the spot and Kensington Lowe fleeing in tears. By mid-afternoon, Trauma MC had somehow acquired cell phone footage. It was grainy and shot from a distance, but unmistakable. There was Rafferty looking stunned. There was Kensington gesticulating wildly. And there was Garnet, a figure of impossible calm, standing with her phalanx of strollers before turning and walking away. The clip went viral. The hashtags #Maxwell meltdown and #quadruple bypass started trending on Twitter. For Rafferty, the world turned into a fortress. He retreated to his empty Fifth Avenue penthouse, the silence of the marble halls a roaring testament to his isolation. The Connecticut estate was Garnet's territory now. His lawyer had warned him in the starkest possible terms not to go there, not to contact her, not to do anything that could be construed as harassment or intimidation. All communication was to go through legal channels. His phone buzzed incessantly, with calls and texts from board members, investors, friends and enemies, all seeking to get the measure of the scandal. His life, once a carefully curated image of power and success, was now public fodder, a soap opera for the masses. The narrative taking shape was disastrous for him. He was the villain, the cheating, eating billionaire caught red-handed. Kensington was a pathetic figure, the vapid homewrecker who got her just desserts. But Garnet was becoming a folk hero. In the court of public opinion, she was the wronged wife who had endured her husband's flagrant infidelity with quiet dignity, all while secretly carrying and giving birth to his 4 children. Her arrival at the airport wasn't seen as an ambush. It was seen as a power move of legendary proportions. Feminist blogs wrote glowing articles about her strategic genius. Mom groups celebrated her strength. She was the ultimate example of a woman taking back control. Her silence in the media only amplified her mystique. She released no statements. She gave no interviews. She simply disappeared behind the gates of the Connecticut estate, leaving the world to speculate. Meanwhile, Kensington Lowe, after 20 hours of silence, tried to seize back the narrative. She posted a tearful, multi-part story to her Instagram. Using a black and white filter and speaking in a shaky voice, she painted herself as the true victim. The truth is, she sniffled, looking directly into her phone's camera. Raffi and I were in love, deeply in love. His marriage was over long before I came into the picture. It was a business transaction. There was no warmth, no affection. He was trapped, and I was his escape. She paused for a dramatic breath. This stunt with the babies, it's a trap. She's a cold, calculating woman who is using those poor children as pawns to get the biggest divorce settlement in history. My heart breaks for Raffi, and it breaks for those babies who are being used in this horrible, toxic way. I just hope the truth comes out. The attempt backfired spectacularly. The comments were a bloodbath. The only thing that's cold and calculating is your attempt to rebrand yourself as a victim. One top comment read. Another said, "Girl, he was carrying your pink purse while his wife was in labor with quads. Read the room." Her post was screenshotted and mercilessly mocked on Twitter. She was no longer just a homewrecker. She was a delusional narcissist. Within a week, she had lost over 500,000 followers and was dropped by the 3 major brands she had endorsement deals with. For Rafferty, the business implications were becoming severe. Maxwell Global Properties stock took a 15% hit in 2 days. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. "This is a PR nightmare, Rafferty," said Lawrence Schmidt, a grizzled, no-nonsense board member who had known Rafferty for 20 years. "Our brand is built on stability, on long-term vision. Right now, our CEO looks like a character in a bad reality TV show. The investors are spooked." "It's my personal life, Lawrence," Rafferty retorted, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Not anymore, it isn't," Schmidt shot back. "Not when it's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's lifestyle section. We've got a morality clause in your contract for a reason. This isn't just immoral, it's sloppy. It makes you look reckless. And if you look reckless in your personal life, how can we trust you're not being reckless with our shareholders' money?" Rafferty was trapped. His lawyer, Robert Driscoll, a man who typically oozed aggressive confidence, was now counseling caution. "Her lawyer is Eleanor Reese," Driscoll said, his voice grim in their meeting later that day. "She's not just a divorce attorney, she's a killer. She's known for taking down giants. She represented Maria Popov against her oligarch husband. Popov walked away with the super yacht, the London townhouse, and half his stake in the oil company. Reese doesn't just fight, she annihilates." "So, what's her play?" Rafferty asked, pacing his lawyer's office high above Park Avenue. "Right now, she's letting you drown," Driscoll said bluntly. "Every article that comes out, every meme, every shred of public sympathy for Garnett is another nail in your coffin. When we get to the negotiating table, or God forbid a courtroom, she'll argue that you are an unstable, morally bankrupt influence. She'll use Kensington. She'll use the airport scene. She'll use your own recklessness to paint a picture of a man who cannot be trusted with the welfare of his children. So I lose my children." The thought was a physical pain. "You're going to have to fight like hell for even partial custody," Driscoll admitted. "And it's going to cost you a fortune. Reese and Garnett hold all the cards. They have the children, and they have the moral high ground. We have a pink handbag and a tearful Instagram post from your ex-girlfriend." The stark reality of his situation was settling in. He had thought he held all the power, all the wealth, all the control. But Garnett, with one quiet, perfectly executed move, had checkmated him. She hadn't just left him, She had strategically dismantled his life from a distance, using his own hubris as her weapon. He had to get ahead of it. He had to do something. "I need to make a public statement," Rafferty declared. "Apologize. Show remorse. Frame myself as a man who made a terrible mistake and is ready to atone for it." Driscoll sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's risky. It's an admission of guilt. Reese will tear it apart." "Doing nothing is worse," Rafferty insisted. "I'm being defined by TMZ. I need to define myself." Against Driscoll's better judgment, the statement was drafted. It was a carefully worded piece of corporate-speak contrition released through a major PR firm. In it, Rafferty expressed his deepest regret for his personal failings and the pain caused to his family. He stated that his sole focus now was on healing his family and earning the right to be a father to his beloved children. The statement was met with widespread cynicism. It was seen as a desperate lawyer-approved attempt at damage control. But it did have one unforeseen consequence. It provoked Eleanor Reese to finally break her silence. She didn't give a TV interview or a magazine exclusive. She simply released a one-sentence statement to the Associated Press. It read, "Mr. Maxwell speaks of earning the right to be a father. We look forward to the discovery process, which will determine if he ever had that right to begin with." The statement was chilling. It wasn't just a legal threat. It was a promise that this was only the beginning, a promise that whatever secrets Rafferty Maxwell had, she was coming for them. Eleanor Reese operated not out of a flashy high-rise, but a discreet, elegant brownstone on the Upper East Side. Her office was lined with law books and modern art, a space that projected both intellectual rigor and ruthless taste. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a demeanor that was utterly unflappable. When Garnett had first walked into her office, 2 months before the airport confrontation, she had presented her case with the same quiet poise she would later display at JFK. "My husband is having an affair," Garnett had stated simply. "I am 32 weeks pregnant with our children, via surrogacy, a fact I have not yet shared with him. I want to file for divorce, and I want sole custody." Eleanor had listened without interruption, her expression betraying nothing. The use of a surrogate explained how Garnett had kept the pregnancy a secret. It was a detail born of a broken marriage, a journey to parenthood she had clearly undertaken alone. "Sole custody is the highest mountain to climb, Mrs. Maxwell," Eleanor had said, when Garnett finished. "The courts favor shared custody. We need to prove he is more than just an adulterer. We need to prove he is unfit." "He is," Garnett had replied, her voice firm. "His priorities are his ego and his new girlfriend. That is not a fit environment for children." Now, weeks after the airport, Eleanor's promise to determine his right to fatherhood was in full swing. The legal discovery process was a war of attrition, and Eleanor Reese was its field marshal. Her team of forensic accountants and private investigators began to systematically deconstruct Rafferty Maxwell's life. They subpoenaed everything: bank records, credit card statements, flight manifests, phone logs, emails, text messages. Rafferty's legal team, led by Robert Driscoll, was forced to comply, fighting to redact information and limit the scope, but Eleanor's requests were relentlessly precise. Driscoll warned Rafferty, "She's not just looking for evidence of spending on the girlfriend. She's looking for a pattern of behavior, a narrative of recklessness." Eleanor's team combed through years of data. They found the lavish gifts for Kensington, the $500,000 diamond necklace from Graf, the lease on a Porsche Taycan, the rent on a sprawling Soho loft. They found the trips Aspen, Monaco, a chartered yacht in the Amalfi Coast. It was all damning, but it was expected. It established his infidelity and profligacy, but it didn't necessarily prove him an unfit father. Eleanor knew she needed more. "Look deeper," she instructed her lead investigator, a former FBI agent named Peter Chen. "Don't just look at Maxwell. Look at the girlfriend, Kensington Lowe. Who is she? Where did she come from?" Kensington, had scrubbed her online presence clean after her disastrous Instagram story. But the internet's memory is long. Chen and his team started digging. Her public story was that she was from a well-to-do family in California, had attended a Swiss finishing school, and had found herself as a creative force in the digital space. It was all vague and glossy. Chen's team started pulling public records. There was no record of a Kensington Lowe graduating from any prominent California high school. No birth certificate under that name matched her stated age. The address she'd listed on her driver's license application 5 years ago traced back to a mail forwarding service. "She's a ghost," Chen reported to Eleanor. "The identity, Kensington Lowe, seems to have materialized out of thin air about 6 years ago." "Nobody materializes out of thin air," Eleanor replied, a glint in her eye. "Everyone has a past. Find it." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While cross-referencing photos from Kensington's early pre-fame Instagram posts with facial recognition software, they got a hit. It wasn't on social media. It was on a grainy mugshot from a police department in rural Ohio. The name on the booking sheet was not Kensington Lowe. It was Katie Jenkins. The charge from 8 years prior was felony fraud. Eleanor Reese leaned back in her chair as Chen presented the file. The story it told was astonishing. Katie Jenkins, a checkout girl from a dead-end town, had been arrested for her involvement in a series of sweetheart scams. She and a partner would target lonely middle-aged men, online cultivate relationships, and then invent elaborate emergencies that required large sums of money. Katie was the bait. She had been arrested, but the charges were eventually dropped when the main target, a widowed farmer she had bilked out of $60,000, refused to testify, claiming he was still in love with her, and she had promised to pay him back. After the charges were dropped, Katie Jenkins had vanished. A year later, the sophisticated, worldly Kensington Lowe appeared in New York City. "She didn't just change her name," Chen said, pointing to the file. "She changed everything. This isn't just a girl who wanted a better life. This is a professional predator. St. Bart's wasn't the end of the affair. It was likely the beginning of her endgame to secure a marriage proposal." Eleanor's lips curved into a thin, satisfied smile. This was it. This was the weapon. It was more powerful than infidelity. It wasn't just that Rafferty had chosen a mistress over his wife. It was that his judgment was so fundamentally, catastrophically flawed that he had chosen a professional con artist. He had brought a predator into his life, and by extension, had nearly brought her into the lives of his children. "He's not just a bad husband," Eleanor murmured to herself. "He's a fool, and a court will not entrust the welfare and the multi-billion-dollar inheritance of 4 infants to a fool." The strategy shifted immediately. Driscoll's team had been preparing to fight a battle over infidelity and finances. They were about to be blindsided by a battle over character and competence. Eleanor prepared her motion. It wasn't a request for more money. It was a motion for a court-ordered psychological evaluation of Rafferty Maxwell, citing his demonstrated pattern of engaging with individuals of questionable character and his impaired judgment, which posed a direct threat to the safety and security of the minor children. Appended to the motion as Exhibit A was the complete authenticated file on one Ms. Katie Jenkins of Ohio, including the fraud charge and the damning mugshot. The motion was filed under seal, but Eleanor knew that in high-profile cases, under seal was a temporary state. She sent a copy via courier to Robert Driscoll's office. When Driscoll opened the package and saw the file, he knew the war was already lost. His client hadn't just been caught cheating, he had been exposed as a marker sucker. The narrative had shifted from tragedy to farce. He picked up the phone to call Rafferty. It was going to be the most difficult conversation of his career. Rafferty Maxwell was in his penthouse, staring at a photo on his phone. It was a paparazzi shot taken with a long lens of Garnet walking on the grounds of the Connecticut estate. She was pushing one of the double strollers, her nanny beside her with the other. The sun was shining. She looked serene, peaceful. It was a life that was continuing thriving without him. His phone rang, piercing the heavy silence. It was Robert Driscoll. "You need to come to my office. Right now." Driscoll's voice was stripped of its usual bravado. It sounded strained, tired. "Don't ask questions. Just come." An hour later, Rafferty sat in the same chair where he had learned about Eleanor Reese's fearsome reputation. This time, the atmosphere was 100 times more grave. Driscoll didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a file across the polished mahogany desk. "You need to see this," he said. "It's a motion from Reese, and this is her Exhibit A." Rafferty opened the file. His eyes fell on the mugshot first. It was a younger, raw version of Kensington, but the face was undeniably hers. The eyes held a defiant, calculating glint. Then he saw the name Katie Jenkins. The charge, felony fraud. He read the summary of the sweetheart scam, his blood running cold. The lonely farmer, the manufactured crises, the empty promises. It was like reading the blueprint for his own relationship with Kensington. The constant low-grade dramas. The emergency need for a new car because her old one was unsafe. The investment opportunity from a friend that required a quick wire transfer of $100,000. The sob story about her estranged family who had supposedly cut her off, making her entirely dependent on him. He had seen it all as part of the package, the price of admission for her youth and beauty. He had seen it as high maintenance, not as a calculated professional con. The penthouse rent, the designer clothes, the jewelry, the trips. He wasn't her lover. He was her mark. The biggest one she had ever landed. The farmer from Ohio lost $60,000. He stood to lose billions and, more importantly, his children. A wave of profound, suffocating humiliation washed over him. It was worse than the guilt, worse than the anger. He, Rafferty Maxwell, who could spot a flaw in a balance sheet from 100 paces, who could read the hidden motivations of the world's most cunning business rivals, had been played for a fool by a checkout girl from Ohio. A psychological evaluation. He read from the motion, his voice barely a whisper. Impaired judgment. She's going to argue that you're an incompetent fool who can't be trusted. Driscoll said, his voice flat. She'll say that your lack of judgment is so profound, you would have unknowingly exposed your children to a predator. She's not wrong, is she? The question was brutal, but necessary. Rafferty leaned back, the fight draining out of him. He looked out the window at the city skyline. He had helped to build a monument to his power and vision. It all felt like a sham. What good was vision if you couldn't see what was right in front of your face? What do we do? He asked the question, a plea. We surrender, Driscoll said quietly. We give her everything she asked for in the initial petition. The full settlement amount. The assets and sole, legal and physical custody. No, Rafferty said, a spark of his old fire returning. Not sole custody. I will not give up my children. Rafferty, you don't have a choice, Driscoll's voice rose in frustration. If this file becomes public, and it will, Eleanor will make sure of it, the narrative changes. You're no longer the cheating husband. You're the duped billionaire. You become a laughingstock. The board won't just be spooked. They'll have grounds to remove you. The morality clause becomes an intelligence clause. You'll lose your company. You'll lose everything. Your only play right now is to contain the damage. The logic was inescapable. The humiliation of the Katie Jenkins story leaking would be absolute and total. It would destroy what little credibility he had left. If we give her sole custody, Driscoll continued, his voice softening, we can negotiate for visitation, generous, structured visitation. We can try to add clauses about re-evaluating the custody arrangement in a few years once the dust has settled. We can frame it as you doing what's best for the children, removing them from the conflict. It's the only way you can salvage any shred of dignity here. You have to fall on your sword to avoid being pushed onto it. Rafferty sat in silence for a long time, the weight of his lawyer's words crushing him. Surrender. The word was alien to him. He had never surrendered in his life. He had fought, he had crushed, he had won. But now his opponent was not a business rival. It was the consequences of his own choices, embodied by a woman he had never truly known, and a lawyer who was 10 steps ahead of him. He thought of the babies, William, Oliver, Charlotte, and Sophia. He had seen them for less than 5 minutes, but they were a part of him. The instinct to be their father, to protect them, was a raw, primal thing he was only just beginning to understand. And the ultimate irony was that the only way to protect them now was to formally give them up, to protect them from the fallout of his own catastrophic mistakes. "Okay," he said finally, the word tasting like poison. "Draw up the offer. Give her everything. Just get me visitation. Get me a path back to my children. I don't care what it costs." Robert Driscoll nodded, a look of grim relief on his face. The war was over. Now began the long, painful process of negotiating the terms of his defeat. That night, the news about Katie Jenkins broke. An anonymous source, almost certainly from Eleanor Reese's camp, had leaked the entire file to a reputable investigative journalist. The story was even more devastating than Page 6 had been. It wasn't gossip, it was a deeply researched exposé of a con artist and her biggest mark. The mugshot was everywhere. Rafferty Maxwell, the titan of industry, was no longer a villain. He was a punchline. 2 weeks later, the ink was dry on a settlement that shook New York society. Garnett was granted sole legal and physical custody, along with a vast fortune that secured her independence forever. In return for his swift capitulation, Rafferty received 2 things: an ironclad NDA to silence the public humiliation and the right to see his children twice a week under the watch of a court-appointed supervisor. His first visit was at the Connecticut estate, a place he now entered as a guest. The supervisor, Ms. Gable, led him to the sunroom, where Garnett stood waiting beside 4 bassinets. The air was thick with unspoken history. "Jen," he began, his voice thick with a prepared apology. She cut him off, not with anger, but with a weary finality. "Don't, Rafferty. Your apologies are for you. All that matters now is them." She glanced at the bassinets. "They are innocent, and this is your chance to know them. Don't waste it." As she turned to leave for a meeting at the new foundation she had already established, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said, without looking back, "I never wanted to destroy you. I only wanted to protect them." Then she was gone, leaving him alone with Miss Gable and the 4 quiet heartbeats that had upended his world. He approached the bassinets, his heart pounding. 4 pairs of wide, curious eyes stared back up at him. He was a stranger to them. Hesitantly, he reached out and stroked the soft cheek of his son William. The baby instinctively leaned into his touch, a small, trusting gesture that shattered Rafferty's remaining pride. In that moment, a profound and unfamiliar love pierced through his shame, a feeling that had nothing to do with power or possession. He had lost his wife, his reputation, and an empire of wealth. But as he looked at the 4 innocent faces, he understood his true loss and his only path forward. The road back would not be paved with money or influence, but with humility and time. Ignoring the silent vibration of his phone, where his corporate world continued to burn, Rafferty pulled up a chair. He simply sat, watching his children, finally understanding that his penance and his redemption were one and the same. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a billionaire's downfall. It was a story about the collision of 2 kinds of power: the loud, empty power of wealth and ego, symbolized by a pink handbag, and the quiet, unyielding power of dignity and a mother's fierce love. Rafferty Maxwell lost an empire of his own, making only to be faced with the monumental task of building something far more important, a relationship with the children he almost threw away. Garnett Maxwell. The woman he underestimated proved that true strength isn't about controlling others, but about taking control of your own destiny. even if it means walking through fire to do it. She didn't just win a divorce settlement. She won her freedom, her self-respect, and the future for her children. What do you think? Was Garnett's move at the airport a stroke of genius or an act of war? Could Rafferty ever truly redeem himself in the eyes of his children? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of scandal survival and ultimate vindication, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story with real-life drama. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales that prove the truth is often more dramatic than fiction.